here we are. We're talking about plant guilds and human communities today, and how we can, model maybe parts of our lives and our communities, our neighborhoods, after plants, and the way that they come together and create mutually supported guilds, and we'll be sharing a lot of that. So I am going to be sharing off my computer. You might see me looking away where we've got lots going on here. So hopefully it all works out. And we'll be there might be some interactive pieces. We'll be asking you to put some stuff up in the chat. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with just a really brief kind of what's permaculture anyway, just in case somebody is not has not been turned on to permaculture just yet. And so what even is it? So what we like to say in our class, we teach actually a course here in Santa Cruz, where we're both living in the Seabright area, and we're bringing in just the idea of story. So if we're looking at our landscapes and our gardens and even our personal lives or our professional lives as stories. So what exists right now? Right, so as the observer, we're paying attention. We're really cluing into what is happening now, and then really starting to envision what's going to happen next. And that what's happening next is really grounded in a knowledge of our ability and the skill of working with nature and within nature, and rather than against, and co-creating with nature rather than imposing our humanness on our natural surroundings.
Yeah, and permaculture really focuses on this idea that in a resilient system, whether that be something exclusively human or the natural world or both, that really what's happening is a bunch of cycles. And what is happening currently in our world is that things have become more linear. We need a lot and we need to get rid of a lot. But an intact functioning cycle, the things that we need come from somewhere within the system, and the things that we need to get rid of become somebody else's food or resource. So what is happening next is that we are thinking about how to restore these cycles and pull ourselves out of this linear trap. It really is a trap.
Right. And so permaculture, if you think of permaculture, again, in the sense of stories, is that there's a whole set of permaculture principles. And these principles, as one of our mentors and teachers, Hazel Ward in Siskiyou Permaculture in Oregon, says, is that it's not just a lens, the different principles. They are actually the stories within themselves that help you find the stories that are happening all around you all the time. So one of the key things we're going to be talking about today in terms of permaculture principles is diversity, right? And the importance of diversity, and how without diversity, there can be no thriving or sustaining or just really life. Actually, life will actually take over. Life will come in all of its diversity and its glory. Yeah. And how can we best facilitate that actually happening, and allowing that to happen, and inviting that to happen?
And then as we increase our diversity, we see how we can integrate the different skills and needs and functions and perspectives of all of these diverse elements in such a way that everybody is helping, everybody is cooperating. So it's this diversity of functionality, not just of static elements. And this integration actually makes everybody's life easier. We all get more of what we need and more of what we want without working so hard, and without reliance on these totally anonymous, invisible systems that are part of this linear trap of extracting from the earth and then throwing shit away.
Right. And so then added to that is the idea of using your on-site resources and using what's already there. Right, so we like to really encourage people, why do you need to have your green bin full all the time, right? Unless you have really gnarly weeds, most of what's in people's green bins can actually be repurposed on site, right where you are, to create habitat and to create richer, more nutrient-dense soil. Keep your organic matter if you can, and just really get rid of the weeds that you don't want. Although, if you're going to hear in our permaculture course, we are fans of the unloved weeds. There are many unloved weeds that produce flowers that attract native bees, and so. But that's another discussion all the time. Another time.
It's more transformation of the things we think we don't want, like our wastes, into resources that we can then use to increase the vitality and health of the system.
Right.
Okay, and so then one of our favorite permaculture principles is that every element serves many functions and every function is supported by many elements. And that's a lot of words. Like, what does that mean? Well, really, it just means that each player, each individual, be it a person or a plant or an animal in your system, is serving the system in many different ways. So not just being beautiful or not just making food, but being beautiful, making food, creating shade, creating habitat, creating microclimates of moisture and all of that. And that every function that is required, like the function of having enough water or having enough food or having a safe place to sleep, that is provided by many elements. So you can just say this is the redundancy principle, that we can't really be relying on one thing to serve all of our needs, or making ourselves only be able to do one thing. So again,
and it's many hands light work, right? It's bringing together, as we're talking about plant guilds, think about your own communities, either your families, your broader communities, your neighborhoods. Think about how many different elements there are there, how many different functions are there, and how can you create ways for people to be communicating and having the many hands make light work on these different levels, because that's what plants are doing. That's what plants are modeling for us all the time. And the other thing that they're modeling all the time, which is the last principle, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about it, we're just mentioning it, framing it now for you, adding it to the context, is stacking functions, which is actually one of my favorite, because it stopped me from multitasking in my life. So instead of multitasking, which is trying to do tons of different things all at once that are not really complementary, you actually stack functions so that you're doing one thing that is achieving many outcomes or many desirables, right, that you have either in your garden or in your life. So stacking functions, again, you get really familiar with that, and we will be talking about it later. Yeah. So without further ado, why, what do plant guilds and human communities have to even do with each other? So we're just going to take a little moment to reflect on what is a community, right, and what is a guild? In the sense of plants and in the sense of humans. So, the origins and characteristics of communities, we're just going to say really briefly, it's basically, the humans have been gathering for millennia together in places, usually geographically based, landscape based, where they can settle down and be taken care of. They can tend the land and also be cared for by the land. They're not separate from it, they're part of it. And what they do together is they have multiple, again, skills and roles that they fulfill that end up sustaining a thriving village of which they are part of, and the land around them. So this idea that humans lived for millennia in peaceful harmony with nature. And I'm not going to romanticize that or glamorize that, but they do. Their archaeological evidence actually from Maria Gimbutas and Rian Eisler and Carol Christ and different archaeologists and archaeomythologists have found just so much evidence of that. So we can really learn from how native and indigenous European cultures and indigenous cultures from around the world have lived for millennia in relation with the land in settlements.
And that the structures of the settlement, the infrastructure and the goals and the ways of moving through the settlement, they all emerged from what the land had to offer the people, that the people built in response to where they were. Exactly.
So that's just a little piece, right? So think about that as we go in. And then, so then there's also this idea of clarifying so when we think about guilds, a lot of people say, well, a guild is, everybody's the same, right?
It's like a trade guild.
Like a trade guild or a carpenter's guild or some type of guild. But with permaculture, the guild, the joy of the guild is actually diversity, which was the first principle that we brought up. So in a permaculture plant guild, diversity is key. You want to have as much diversity as you can, and you want to have as many different plants fulfilling as many different roles, which we'll talk about, as you can at one time to support a common goal. Usually in a guild, there is a primary core plant, either a tree, so you'll hear about tree guilds, or even a shrub. So it could be like a blueberry or a mulberry or a little larger shrub could be at the center. And then all of the other guild plants and their roles are supporting not just that plant, but the soil and the insects and the birds and that whole place. So we're going to get into that in a moment.
Yeah, there's some sort of classic guild roles that you will hear about in permaculture, and we'll just kind of run through those briefly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the same with human communities, I think I just said it, it's the same thing. Diversity is key. Finding out what skills are needed, what needs are there, what strengths are there in any community or any village, and how can reciprocity happen? How can people be mutual functionality, I think is the word that Lydia used earlier, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So let's dive right into plant guilds.
Yeah.
So
you're gonna call up the image.
I'm gonna share an image.
So in both of these ideas of the plant guild and the human community, it's helpful to just remember that there's scales. So a family is a little community, a neighborhood is a bigger community, a village or a town or whatever is an even larger community. And you'll see these patterns reflecting on different scales. And that is similar to how the core guild that we talk about in permaculture is a little micro fractal of a forest. So just keep that in mind as we move through.
Just the quick one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So here, so Lydia created this flip chart. It's just a picture. We're really low tech usually. We like to use flip charts and whiteboards and things like that. So here are some really common fruit tree guild roles with some different plants that you can be thinking about. So remember, so here you can see that for this guild, excuse me, this is the core plant, right, that is being supported here by all of its guild.
Yes, so that's probably an apple tree. Do you want to go in order here, or?
I need to get some water.
Okay, so I'm going to just jump in with our second point on this, or our second role, the nitrogen fixers. And the nitrogen fixers are plants that have a symbiotic relationship with microbial organisms in the soil. And there's so much to say about the microbes, and we talked about this in some of our previous talks, so we're going to try to be real brief. But these bacteria in the soil form nodules on the roots of plants, and they're able to take the nitrogen out of the air in the soil and combine that with hydrogen and oxygen and turn it into bioavailable nitrogen compounds like ammonia that the plants can uptake. And this is a super critical role because this is how we can kind of make nitrogen out of the air. The plants can't take up that nitrogen gas by themselves. They have to have this intermediary of the plant. So already, we have players with different functions contributing to this role. And then those plants with those bacterial nodules, they can actually share that nitrogen with the surrounding plants. So it doesn't just benefit the plant that has the bacteria nodules, it benefits the whole little guild.
Yeah, and then just the quick quote we wanted to bring in from one of our favorite sheroes of soil and nitrogen, Dr. Christine Jones, that she really says that nitrogen has to be fixed in this way. It has to be fixed biologically in order for carbon to be sequestered in a stable form.
That's
so
right.
Having these nitrogen fixers in our gardens, it's one garden, one landscape at a time working towards climate.
Yes.
Stability, right? So we have to have this type of biologically available nitrogen for the carbon sequestration that everyone's been talking about. It's fantastic that it's being talked about.
Yeah.
But just really driving that point home.
Yeah. So
why this role in a tree guild or in a plant guild is so important.
Yeah, and so much more functional than just the addition of synthetic nitrogens from an external source.
Right.
With this biologically, we're both having some frogs here. Okay, so do you want to?
Yeah, so I'll go back to mulch plants. I'm so sorry, I had a little frog in my throat. So mulch plants. So the idea of the mulch plant, what they're doing is they're providing the biomass. They're providing biomass. They're providing coverage. They're providing mulch where the soil remains moist underneath. Things aren't lost. There's not a lot of evaporation happening. And this is, so a lot of these are the comfrey, the artichoke, the fava bean. So, and you can get actually mulch mixes, right, at the garden store, like a seed blend. And really look, so we're going to talk later about diversity, but again, another thing that Christine Jones says is you don't want to just have all fava beans, right? That a lot of people, I did that for years. I would just have, mulch. Or actually nitrogen fixers. Yeah. I'm going to do fava beans but just fava beans. Well, actually, if you have a mix of 4, that's pretty good. But Dr. Christine Jones says you're wanting to have, and not just of mulch plants, but of all of these guilds, 60 plants to create the type of diversity and the type of resilience to severe weather or climate for all of our gardens. So really think broad and think diverse and think more than just the fava bean or just a comfrey or just the nasturtiums.
But notice already that there's significant overlap between just the two categories we've started with, that fava beans are in both categories. And, you know, I forgot to mention the examples of the nitrogen fixers. You can read them there yourself. And they don't all have the same bacteria in that relationship with them. But again, diversity of different nitrogen fixers, diversity of different mulch plants. Then another super critical role in the guild is the one at the bottom there, nutrient accumulators. And sometimes these are called dynamic accumulators because it's really this kind of moving, changing dynamic system, as opposed to being you know, a static system. Give me the nutrient, thank you. But these nutrient accumulators tend to be these deep tap-rooted plants, or at least they have a very broad-reaching root network. And they're able to essentially mine micronutrients from the subsoil and draw those nutrients into their body, where they concentrate them, combine them with other things through the physiology of the plant, and then they're in their tissues, which then get eaten or fall or die or then lay on the topsoil, and then they're super easy to be assimilated into the topsoil. So diffuse, hard to reach, deep nutrients get brought up, concentrated in the body of this plant, and then gifted to the community as easily accessible nutrient. Ah, what a gift.
Yeah, so great.
Yeah.
Okay, so so one of the next, do you want to name some of the,
yeah,
some of them?
So some of these are Comfrey. A lot of us are familiar with Comfrey because it's quite popular as a permaculture plant. Has a deep taproot. Burdock has a deep taproot. California poppy, deep taproot. Buckwheat, not as deep, but other fine qualities. Dandelions, caraway, chicory, dock. Anybody ever tried to remove a dock they didn't want? Clover, thistles, amazing. You know, people vilify them all the time, but they are actually a huge gift to a system, and they're telling us, like, you need more available nutrient, we'll help you. So beautiful.
Yeah. So one of our other, one of the other roles that's really key is the insect attractors, and also what should be there are the insect repellers as well. So there are plants that attract insects. So we'll talk about pollinators in a moment. So there's insects that attract beneficial insects. This is a really great book if everyone can see it, Good Bugs for Your Garden. And we'll include this in the resources that Nicole sends out afterwards. And also there are ones that, that deter the pests that you want. Yeah. So for example, one of my favorite that I saw recently on a permaculture site was if you plant marigolds in with cabbage, the marigolds will actually deter cabbage worm, which can really destroy cabbage productivity, actually. So this beautiful picture of just rows of cabbage, and between every row of cabbage is a beautiful row of marigolds. And marigolds in general are really powerful at detracting several pests that we don't like. So if you like marigolds, they're always really good in the garden. Try them. They're excellent. Yeah.
Releasing these compounds that push the moths away that are laying those worms, and also some releasing of some root compounds that deter root pests.
Yeah, and they do that sometimes. The different plants do this through smell. Most of the time it's through smell, or as Lydia said, through the different roots and chemicals and chemical compounds. And so some of these, of course, are parsley and dill, fennel, calendula, sunflowers and nasturtium, yarrow, all of these. So again, you'll get this image as well. So really what you're trying to think about are, what can I use to attract what I want, like bees, native bees in particular, which we're going to talk about in a moment, butterflies, even hummingbirds, predators. One of our favorite predators that's an insect that you want to have in your garden is called a lacewing. Should I show that picture real quick? So let's see how this goes. New share.
So this is a huge diverse category of these insects that will prey on the ones that are eating your plant. So we call these the predatory insects. And an easy way to think of it is, these are the carnivores, and the herbivores are your competition eating your plants, and the carnivores are eating your herbivores. So like, oh, that helps. Right.
So a lacewing is something to think about. I mean, it says corn, it says sunflowers. Angelica is a beautiful, beautiful plant that you could bring into any guild. And so what they do is that their larvae like to impale aphids. Who doesn't like aphid impalers? I'm sorry. And it's going off to a good cause, because it's feeding the larvae of this beautiful little lacewing. They have beautiful lacy wings, and they are attracted to these types of flowers and mores. And notice this, For some flowering weeds, bring in the lacewings that will help you get rid of your aphids. So if you're having an aphid problem, actually we'll go all into that in the PDC, and like why you might be having that, actually related to nitrogen and other things. So the lacewing. So this is just a little example of a really great, of a different, just thinking about it differently. What can I plant to bring in an insect like this, which is going to help me with my aphid problem, which I've been having for a long time. So instead of using pesticides, even instead of using the soap mixture that some people use, it doesn't always work, right? That has mixed results. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to where we were.
And that the goal is never to completely eliminate aphids. It's just to keep the aphid population small enough that it's not impacting our harvest capacity, but we still have aphids to feed the green lacewing larvae and to feed the ladybug larvae and all of that. Everybody's welcome in balance.
Great, so I think we've got that. And then the grass, well, there's bulbs. So here on here, Lydia made this a while ago, it's grass suppressing bulbs, but there's bulbs can also do a lot more. They can also deter critters in your garden, and gophers in particular. And I've used onions and daffodils and garlic and all types of different bulbs to really deter gophers and little critters up in the garden where I work at UC Santa Cruz, and also in my own garden. They really don't seem to like it. So they don't come around.
Really thick, right? The bulb mass, and then all these little plant shoots coming up, like a very thick kind of barrier type. Really effective. So those are the basic categories. And if you look up permaculture plant guilds, you'll find everybody has a kind of different take on it, and they might have 3 categories or 7 categories, and it's all awesome. It's all good. And if you're curious, just go and check out what's available on that online, as well as through some of the books that we'll send you in the resource section.
Okay, so just take note of these. So the mulch plants, nitrogen fixers, insect attractors, and deterrents, bulbs, grass suppressing bulbs. Other grass suppressors though are also comfrey and mullein and dandelion.
Some
if you
of those
notice
mulch
those.
Plants,
So if you're having an issue with even types of crabgrass or whatever, and you want to have a nice guild, you could put some of those in there to help suppress some of what you don't want. So again, just think, but it's just reciprocity, right?
Yeah.
It's just working together and knowing your land, knowing what you have there, and deciding what you want to keep and what you want to move on. Yeah. Right? And you're using the guild in this way.
So here's like our core concept of, look at all these different roles, look at all these different players. Here's this diversity. Some of these players do multiple functions. There's many other players that are doing the same functions. Let's just bring them all in. What do you like? What grows well in your area? What's beautiful to you? You know, there are a lot of, you know, pseudo recipes, but really this is an open book where you get to just pick from these categories and assemble something that really looks good to you.
Right, and some people, we wanted to just mention that some people get a little bit confused with guilds and companion planting. So plant guilds are very similar to the idea of companion planting, but one of the main differences is that the guild normally has one core, or maybe there are several, but there's one core, either a tree or a small tree or a larger shrub that's sort of at the center that maybe has, you know, like the deepest roots that go down, and they're being fed and they're being really made to thrive with the collection of plants that are all around them, like in this picture here. So here's the littler trees, the largest. This would be, this isn't quite a guild, but what we wanted to show here is that you're not only looking at the flowers and the plants, you want to look below the soil and understand what the plant guilds are doing for the top. And then, so Lydia's going to talk about our one of our favorite subjects.
Just to expand beyond the visible or beyond the, you know, sort of concrete like group of plants, but there's so much more going on. Look underground, look at these different colored root-like threads in here, and these are mycorrhizal fungi. So these are funguses that live in the soil, and they have deeply enmeshed relationships with plants. Some of them just surround the outside of a root, and some of them actually penetrate the roots. But the gist of what's going on is that different species of mycorrhizal fungi are connecting different players in the guild or in a whole forest, whatever scale you're working on, and they're allowing for the transfer of water, carbon compounds from photosynthesis, nutrients from uptake in the soil, and then hormones and other information. So that and it's happening on different levels. So the deeper rooted trees, they have a certain species of mycorrhizal that are connecting their roots on this deep, deep level. But then, as you can see in this drawing here, that the shallower rooted ones are connected in their own kind of little bubble. And then there are the crossovers. So you have little pockets of, like matrices of roots connected in the different scales. So little mini ones, and then the deep big ones, and then the connections between them. And they're allowing for a lot of transfer. So even a plant in the shade can be sustained through a connection to a plant in the sun, even though that plant in the shade is not photosynthesizing sufficiently to support itself. It's being supplemented. And this is happening all the time. And yes, as we move through here, we'll talk about how this has been disrupted by some of our modern agricultural practices.
Right, because think about the poor tree on the sidewalk that really doesn't have anything around it. And I know that I think there's a friend on the call on this today who I know purposely went around and planted bulbs and other types of plants around different trees in her neighborhood, I think really for aesthetic beauty. But what was also happening in that moment was that tree was then being supported by other elements, by other plants that had different functions that would directly benefit that one little tree that's all by itself in the sidewalk. So, guerrilla gardening is out there. And if, what's the worst that can happen if you kind of try to support our little local urban trees, right? With more biodiversity, more functions supporting.
Can I see this part?
Yes.
And then back to our hero, Dr. Christine Jones, she points out that plant root inputs, meaning the compounds that plant roots secrete, those are actually calling in, like asking these mycorrhizae to come be with me, come connect to me. I can contribute to this functional resource here. And those exudates build soil carbon 5 to 30 times faster than above ground carbon sources, meaning mulching or adding compost on the surface is great, but getting your plant into that functional relationship where it's secreting carbon out of its roots, the products of its photosynthesis, secreting them out of its roots, sharing them, feeding the soil microbiota, that is 5 to 30 times more effective than just adding organic matter.
Right. So the mulch is great, but if you're just mulching and there's not a lot of other plants going deeper, it's not as effective. So the combined effort of the mulching and all the different roots and the root exudates and what are even better.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
And we're moving through a lot of material really quickly, and the invitation is come join the course, and we will go deep with all of this stuff, and we get more into the science of how this actually happens.
And then write down questions, because we are taking questions at the end. We love your questions.
Yeah.
So cool, right? So the mycorrhizal fungi, they're doing something that we can't even see, but when we're planning, and we talk about this and we're not talking about it today so much, but I'll just presence it in human communities. There's a lot of invisible structures that we also don't see, right? There are invisible structures that are actually hugely influencing the way that we're living our lives, but we don't see them. But just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're there. They're not there.
Yeah.
And greatly affecting, and we need to see how we can positively influence those as well. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen just for a while so you can see our faces. We're going to talk now about pollinators. So like there's the underground, and now there's the overground with the with the guild. So what's happening above ground is you're wanting to really create, like we like to call this actually, if you have a set of guilds in a community, and in my backyard, for example, I'm lucky enough to have what I call a whole wildlife corridor. Right, so with these different plant guilds, you can create habitat for so much more than just plants and just food, right? You can have whole places where I know that my hummingbirds are stoked. They're not mine. The hummingbirds that I am in relation with, that come into the garden that I am blessed to tend, they're stoked on this garden because they know that year round there's something blooming. There are seeds there, right? There's something for every pollinator. There's something for every bird. So with the pollinators that we're going to focus on mostly for today, so actually if you know any pollinators, because we don't have time, I love the topic of pollinators, but so we're going to talk about what's the best pollinator out there, the most effective pollinator. If someone knows, just if you want to type it in the chat, that would be great. I'd like to just, we want to get you a little bit in there.
It's been very quiet in the chat.
It's been very quiet in the chat. So what are some other pollinators? What do you think is the most effective pollinator everybody talks about all the time? Bees. Yay, thank you, Nicole. So bees are actually known as the most efficient, right? They're the most purposeful of all of the pollinators, right? So there are other pollinators too. You have wasps, right? You have beetles, which are actually the largest group of pollinators.
Messiest.
Who knew? And the messiest. They're not. Butterflies are just like the most gorgeous, but guess what? Most of their pollination is incidental. It's by accident, right? They just happen to kind of carry some pollen. They don't necessarily, they have sometimes long tongues, sometimes not, right? So, so they're gorgeous, but they're not as effective as our bees. What are some other ones? Bats, we don't have time to talk about, but whoa, do we love to talk about bats and how awesome they're nocturnal pollinators, along with moths that tend to be nocturnal pollinators. So again, you're thinking, when are I'm going to make this guild, or I'm going to plant these plants. Oh, parasitic wasps are great. You want to get, those are some of the ones you want to bring in with you want to attract some of those, right, into your garden for those. Excellent, Nicole. So let's go into, so we're going to talk about bees. So I'm gonna give you a bunch of hard facts about bees right now because they're so awesome. So there are, who knew, 20,000 species of bees around the world, right? And there's 4,000 here in North America. But check this out, out of 4,000, 70% of them, 2,800, are ground dwellers, right? So this is a lot of the campaign you might be seeing about, like, don't rake up all your leaves, don't just blow it all away or rake it and put it away, because there are ground dwelling bees that need to overwinter and to actually live their life, cycles in these ground.
About the bare soil too.
And the bare soil. So they need not just with mulch, but there are some types of bees that actually need clear ground so that they can make their little
diversity.
You
need everything.
You need some mulch, you need some clear spots, you wanna get the bees. And check it out, the native bees, a lot of people focus on the honeybee. We like to focus on the honeybees are awesome. I love honey. Yeah, and I love native plants, right? Because a lot of native plants, as we talked about earlier, I think we talked a little bit about fire, living with fire, that a lot of native plants are fire resistant, right? So, and we need our native plants, and in order to keep our native plants around, we need our native bees. California is home to 1,600 different species, right? There's 2,800 in all of North America. Here in California, we have 1,600 different species. And so I did a little looking up. We got this great tip a few months ago that, because we were like, oh, we want to learn all the bees. Well, instead of learning all the bees, there was the tip from Ogie Shaw, right? He's an artist here. Is it Ogie Shaw?
No, Obi Kaufman.
Obi Kaufman, sorry. Obi Kaufman, I stand corrected. And he said, don't get to know all of them first, just get to know the top ones in your area. So we got really into the top 6 families in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So I looked it all up for y'all in Solano County and found that you have 5. So there are 5 bees that are most common there. And one of them is a necessarily non-native, but is a honeybee. So honeybees are really prevalent up there in Solano County. You have, and these are all part of the Apidae
bee family.
Apidae family. Okay, you don't have to know that now. We're going to send you a resource with that in there. So, so you have your honeybees, and they nest in colonies, as we know, in hives. Bumblebees, carpenter bees. These are all in the same family. Can you write Apidae, and long-horned bees? And sometimes when you buy different pollinator plants, they will tell you what types of bees and what types of pollinating bees and native bees that they're going to attract. And then you have one of our favorite from the Mycorrhizal family, Leafcutter bees. Okay, so the Leafcutter bees, they are related to blue orchard bees and mason bees, which are some of our favorites. What we want to say about the native bees, so these are yours, Solano County, top 5. Awesome. And what's a really great thing that we want to highlight is the leafcutter bees, the Mycorrhizal family. They're related to what are known as bobs, which are blue orchard bees. And what we love about the blue orchard bee is that they have a 95, and most actually native bees have a higher percentage of successful pollination compared to honeybees. So in the sense of the mason bees or the bobs, they have a 95% pollination success rate compared to a 5% pollination success with honeybees. Right, so there's all this focus on honeybees when actually the native bees, and especially the bobs, are way more effective in pollinating our fruit trees. So the orchard bees, as you know, you can tell that they're for fruit trees. One of our favorite things we read about that is that 250 female bobs, blue orchard bees, can pollinate an acre of apples. Just 250 female bobs. Okay, that's kind of funny, huh? Female bobs. This would take honeybees 1 to 2 colonies whole colonies of tens of thousands of bees. So I'm not, if you love honeybees, yes, I love honey. Keep it going, and let's get on promoting our native bees through the plant guilds that we plant.
That's right. So diversity. So the diversity of plants that we plant brings in this diversity of pollinators, this diversity of insects, which then have these side benefits of pollinating everybody else that we didn't deliberately plant, but is part of our wildlife and our corridors and our habitat and our native, beautiful, precious native systems that we have here, so many in California.
Right, so just go ahead, find I did not bring my resource. We'll send you some resources on native bees, some books and some websites that you can go to, and you have some great resources in Solano County that Sustainable Solano might already be aware of for the bees. So we'll move along in the interest of time. And now let's see what happens.
Let's see, where's the next page?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, right here.
Excellent. Okay. Notes are fun.
Okay.
All right.
So here we are. So let's see, we're at 11:45. So we're bringing this all back. So you all got the functional relationships, right, within the plant guilds, the reciprocal relationships, and how by creating this diversity, we are actually, again, positively impacting the climate and our lives. And it's really the same with human communities. So if we look at the human communities, I've mentioned briefly earlier that it really is this idea of humans living together, right? And if you look at some of the indigenous examples of living in community, in settlements, in villages, what you'll find across the board over millennia is that there's a group of people that we talked about before that are they're really what I read recently, that they have a pact with the land, but it's sacred, not because some god or goddess told them that the land is sacred, but just because of their lived experience, right? So there's this lived experience of community. And then in villages and other ways of looking at it, there was never one person who was responsible for every single thing, right? People had roles, people had responsibilities, they had obligation, right? That they took to heart for their village because they saw that their role was sustaining everyone else, not even just their families. So people had roles. And what's happening right now for a lot of us is we're finding that people, we've really lost a sense of place. Mm-hmm. We've lost even a sense of belonging. There's some beautiful books that we can send. Bell Hooks just wrote a beautiful book called Belonging, and then the Placemaker's Guide, Mark Lakeman, we want to talk about placemaking. But so what has happened traditionally is that, people used to work together. There was a sense of bioregionalism before there was even the word bioregionalism. And that sense of bioregionalism is it's knowing your watersheds, it's knowing the land, it's knowing the animals that are there, it's knowing, if you're, and most of the time on waterways, right? So what's happening now is, check this out, on 2% of the Earth's land, okay, 2% of the Earth's land is inhabited by 50% of the world population. And that 50% of the world's population on 2% of the land is using 75% of the Earth's resources. So we're talking hugely ineffective use of land that we refer to as sacred. I mean, and not to say y'all don't, but, there's this idea of place and belonging we can't possibly have in this sense. And we are not effectively using the resources, right? So we have a lot to learn because check this out, the plant guild, you know, permaculturists didn't create the plant guild. Okay, nature created the plant guild. Some people through millennia, again, just sort of watched and said, oh, those things grow really well together.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to take this one out. Ooh, that plant didn't do well now. Oh, okay, I guess they need each other, right? So it was figured out. We are we're mimicking and learning from and recreating, co-creating patterns with nature through observation over millennia. And that's gone awry.
Yeah. Because what should be happening is that if you bring groups of people together with functional relationships, then they use less resources because they're supporting each other. We interrupt that linear thing and we get back into our cyclical thing. But so here we are with this highly urbanized population where instead of that concentration of humans creating a more efficient situation, it's creating a more intense need for resources and creation of waste. So
right,
we've got this wrong.
So we've got this a little bit wrong, and it's time for us to just take a peek at how it's being done. And the other thing about the bioregionalism and this sense of place and belonging that I noticed, so I teach at our community college, and I've been teaching for, you know, a few decades, and I find that a lot of my students, they don't go outside. And as it turns out that the average American spends 95% of their day inside. That's 36 minutes a day outside. Which if you really think about it, that could really be house to car to grocery to inside to back to work, right? Like now we're not even doing that. Like now a lot of people aren't getting out at all.
Just order in.
Just order in. You know, you got Amazon, you got, what's that thing called? The DoorDash,
Yeah.
You know, all of these different things to stop us from going out. And granted, we're in a unique time in history. So I think that 95% probably went up for a lot of people who aren't even doing that anymore. And we can't have a sense of place, and we can't actually positively impact our landscapes and our gardens unless we are outside interacting and observing. And it's the same with our communities. So what I noticed in this very unique time in history is that I now know way more of my neighbors than I ever did before, all the way like the mile from, less than a mile from my house to the beach. I know the people, I know their dogs, I know their cats, I know when they get home. That's developing a sense of place, right? That's starting to know. So,
so just remember this, like in the beginning, we said the co-create with versus impose upon. To co-create with, you have to be experiencing where you are. You have to go outside and be a part of it and let it influence what you wear and how you decorate and how you plant and what you eat, as opposed to where there's enough of us, we can just bring in our system and plop it right down here and just erase whatever was here before.
Yeah, so we're really curious about how can we as humans create more intentional place, because a plant guild is just, it's planting with intention, right? So you're creating place where things will thrive. How can we do that as humans? So
more images we want to share.
There are just, it's in the interest of time, we have 14. Let me go back to share screen. What would you like to put up?
Where'd they all go? One moment there with the images. We are looking for the Mark Lakeman or the intersection repair.
Yeah, where is the intersection?
The intersection repair. That one.
Let's do this later.
Oh,
okay, so we're going to show you this lovely picture while we're talking, so you get to see something. So this is an example of an intersection repair that was done in Portland, Oregon. It's part of the community work that is co-done with one of our favorite people, actually, Mark Lakeman, just a really lovely, humble man who does a lot of really great work in Portland. And so he was actually one of the first people to build one of the little libraries. He built the first with his neighbors' kids. And as you know, that's grown. So again, creating gathering places. So this idea of placemaking is intentionally getting to know where you are on the planet and who is around you and what skills do they have and what needs do they have and how can their skills meet your needs and vice versa, right? On a much larger level. And so
people are decorating here. They're using motifs from their environment. So this kind of dandelion or sunflower pattern and that role of that plant and what it does, and just sort of honoring it and honoring the reflection of it in each of those individuals as they created this mural as a community. This is symbolic and it's real and it's engaging people in this place where they live.
Right, and the idea is that before this, people didn't have community gathering places. Like, think about your own communities. Do you have community gathering places? And so part of this this placemaking is looking at village archetypes. And so this place here in this intersection, this would be known as one of the village archetypes is the village heart, right? So the village heart is a place where people can come, where they can come and they can exchange, they can find each other, they can celebrate. So people celebrate birthdays here, people celebrate weddings here, and they co-created the design and painted the street, right? So if we have time, we're going to show you our little idea for our area.
But you could say, oh, this is like that fruit tree at the core of the guild. This is the village heart that everything is kind of revolving around and using as this central focal point.
Exactly. So this is its core, like the core of the plant guild.
Can you show the grid versus organic village?
I think so.
Okay. So, so we want you to start thinking about the parallels between those guild roles and that guild structure and these community roles and these community structures, and what one of those guild roles did you see yourself in? Could you imagine yourself as a dynamic accumulator or a nitrogen fixer? And what does that mean? Oh, okay, we have a cool image that won't come up for you, but we wanted to bring in this idea of the grid structure in our communities versus this more organic kind of lobular or radial or pod-like structure of a human settlement that emerged from the place.
I can show, maybe we should talk about our place.
Okay, yeah, we'll show.
So, you know, for myself, the idea of placemaking, I feel like Santa Cruz is a really small town, but we have all these neighborhoods and they're not connected at all. So Lydia and I went on a little journey to find out where our places. Gosh, you know, what's happening is, no.
Oh, wait, okay.
This is the grid.
So this is the grid. So, you know, the Roman grid, the modern structure, the way that we design our communities is based on these intersecting lines at 90-degree angles versus on the left, this much more organic way of people emerging in lobes or pods or radiating kind of more floral looking patterns, right? And Mark Lakeman goes way into this, totally worth a deep dive, but really this grid is about control.
It's about control and it's about isolation and actually keeping people more separate than not. You know, this is keeping people more open. There's more shared boundaries, you know, there's more shared edges with more people, right? Which is more inviting for conversation and all of that. So we thought, well, let's look at our little town in Santa Cruz. I just have to click on,
And considering what are people gathering for? What are people gathering around? And the need for water was one of those key structural influencers in the human. Oh, we can't get the picture of Seabright. Okay. Well, so, okay, we're just having some technical difficulties, but what we wanted to show you was our neighborhood, Seabright, here in Santa Cruz. And it's kind of grid-ish, but there's also this way where we have located this intersection that's just out there that is more radial, that somehow there were 6 streets that came together. And we've always wondered, why is this one like this? And why, you know, what's happening? And then Anne totally noticed that one of the houses in this little 6-part coming together has an old well in the front yard.
Yeah, and so what you end up seeing, and I'm gonna try to find it for you.
I think she's getting it.
This is it. Oh, good. Okay.
Is it shared though?
No.
Okay, still coming. And so that somewhere in the development of Santa Cruz, we're hypothesizing that people were gathering around this well and that the streets emerged in this structure based on those uses and the way that people were coming in and coming out of this necessary resource node.
So that you can kind of see, everyone's seeing this. So this is basically the well, this tiny little dot. And so I live right around here, and this is Lydia's house right here. And when we started trying to find our boundaries, we're like, oh, here's a little river and here's a little creek. And oh, look at how all the roads lead to this really weird this is the weirdest intersection ever. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is this historical house and this is our well. So we actually figured out that, oh, this used to already be the village heart. And this is the intersection that we would like to do intersection repair on, to gather people in this neighborhood of ours at Seabright. So really fun ideas to just look at your own neighborhood, see if you find some unexpected out of this grid. Notice how the grid kind of stops, right? You can see the curved angles of what it used to be like, and that the river is right here, you can't quite see, and the ocean is just right out over here. So this is a gathering point already. So what gathering points can you reclaim? Because placemaking is actually the intentional reclaiming of public spaces. So taking public spaces and making them places of belonging. Yeah. And I love, in the placemaking language, they talk about a place that is repaired. They call it's place made. Place made. So they place made it. Yeah. They repaired it. Yeah. Right? So it wasn't broken. So we don't have to use the broken language of repair. We took a public space and then we place made it so that it was more welcoming and more opening, just like we're doing when we're creating a plant guild. This is a way of creating a human guild where we're all being more supported. And we have our village heart, and we're seeing ourselves as more connected and belonging more to and with each other. And notice how the guild and the village heart, like, they are providing places for all these different elements to come and interact and overlap. Like the guild, all the insects and all the mycorrhizal fungi and all these different plants, they're coming into contact with each other so that they can be receiving and giving. And here we are as human beings, we're all coming together for something. Here it was water, maybe it's the market, maybe it's the place we all gather to find out news when the internet is down and our phones aren't working. But these are reasons to gather to exchange so that we can be in relationship with each other. Yeah, and we are going to share a really lovely get to know your neighbor exercise, which is some ideas, and some of my favorite was, for example, because how many of us know our neighbors? I know my neighbors so much better since the beginning of this unique time in history. And one of the ideas is to make a pet map. Like, go around door to door and find out who has pets. Because people love to talk about their dogs. They love to talk about their dogs. They love to talk about their cats. And then that way, when a dog goes missing or a cat goes missing, you could say, oh, you find a cat in your yard. Like, cats come in my yard all the time. I have no idea where they belong, right? But then I notice if it's a new one, and then I try to see its tag and try to figure out where it's from. Well, if I had a little pet map, I'd say, oh, that's Rebecca's cat from around the corner. Okay, hey, come here, you naughty. Let's go take you back to mama, right? So this idea of getting to know your neighbors in like little special ways like that. Or what we already start to do here is we have a tool exchange and tool share between just a few people, but all in our neighborhood. We all don't have to have a lawnmower. We all don't have to have a hedge cutter. We don't all have to have a weed whipper, right? But we can borrow from each other, and then we can get better tools, keep them longer. What's the thing? The average drill is used for like a half an hour in its lifetime. So imagine if I have this awesome drill. You need a drill? I have a driver too. Hey, and I have portable battery, and it's battery, no cord. Borrow it, give it more than a half hour of a lifetime, right? So, and then if somebody's borrowing Anne's drill and Anne says, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm building some shelves. Oh, well, did you know that so-and-so next door is a carpenter? And oh, so-and-so is trying to get rid of some lumber. And oh, and then more connections. So yeah, can you show some of the pictures, like the monoculture, polyculture comparisons and stuff? I thought we should go on into our practical ways to integrate. So one of the main things we want to talk about, though, is that the way we're living our lives as human beings in communities, and if this is not your community, awesome, is it's a lot like monoculture, right? A lot of us are being expected to do everything, right? And it's not sustainable for us. So actually creating community, creating place and belonging is absolutely essential for our thriving and our sustaining. And if you are pulling it off, kind of doing it all yourself, it's only because we have these massive anonymous systems delivering stuff to us in the linear model. Extraction and destruction and human rights violations galore, and we can just sit and receive and not have to know anything about that. So these systems have allowed us to create these independent lives, but we're really more and more dependent on things that are further away from us and less in integrity with how we want to live on this planet. Yeah, and so this is if you see it before me, the we wanted to show.
Which one are you looking for?
Oh, here we go. This is the monocrop. So this is the monocrop. This is our lives. This is us not separated. And here's
not connected.
Not connected. Sorry, not connected. Very separate. And although this is beautiful and very green, notice that there's really just one thing. I think this is a soybean. There's nothing in between. So the poor little soybean has to do everything on its own. You know, who knows? It can't sustain all the roles that it needs in a guild. There would be so much more yield if all of these soybeans were not having to do all the work. And guess what? When there's only one, nature will come in. You know, who said it? The author. You don't have to, but a famous author said, you know, if you throw nature out the window, she's gonna come back through the front door with a pitchfork. And what happens in monoculture?
Masanobu Fukuoka.
Yeah, he wrote the One Straw Revolution. And so it's the same thing with monoculture. If you try to grow just one thing, nature says, oh, but it needs help, it needs help. And so then weeds come in, and then you need herbicides for the weeds, right? And then little insects come in and they try to help, and then they get pesticides and then they get killed. And then you have the fungus comes and they try to help, like we do their little mycorrhizal thing, and then the fungicides come. So it's actually more labor intensive, more costly, and more destructive to the earth. And think about it on the human scale. If we're trying to do it all alone, what's our medicine? What's the medicine that we're taking? Like, you know, like the monocrops, right? So the idea is, let's do it together and create intentional, co-created communities of plants. And
polyculture. This is the most stunning.
This is the most stunning. It's not showing up here, maybe a bit bigger view. There we go. Can you see that better? Yeah. So this is what we want. Right? Look at all this. Oh my God, look at the cabbage, right? And look at some of the marigolds, and look at some of the bulbs that are planted all around. And all of this, so this is more companion planting, what we're talking about, but this is polyculture, right? And this is how beautiful polyculture can be, and it's how beautiful human cultures can be when we really look at the gifts, the strengths, and also the needs that can be filled through each other working together. So, so we wanted to just give you a brief sense of what you can do to create these in your life. And so first of all, the first one is plant a guild, right? So hopefully y'all have space you can do that. If you don't,
it can be very small.
It can be really small. And if you don't, just geek out on it. Maybe you find something cool, and then you go to your friend's house and they have a tree. You know, like walnut guilds are kind of fun because not very much grows underneath them, but the things that do are really beautiful and they're really big. So geek out. You know, the invitation is create a plant guild.
And maybe you could make something in a 6-foot diameter circle where you could get a small fruit tree and, you know, 10 or so little understory plants. And it could just be this gorgeous focal point. It could become the heart of your backyard where you're going and observing every day. And then you get to see the insects coming in, and you can imagine those mycorrhizal fungal networks developing, and you can dig in there and you can see that white mycelium connecting things together and drawing in all of the organic matter. And it can be a real teacher for you, this tiny little guild in a 6-foot diameter circle in your yard can become the heart of your attention and focus, and an example for how you can expand that kind of thinking.
Exactly. So the other thing is placemaking, which we said. So one of the invitations is to get to know your neighbor. We're going to send you some really cool things to do to get to know your neighbor. There's even a cool thing I wanted to show. I'm just going to show a picture of it in the Mark. So this is Mark Lakeman's City Repairs Placemaking Guidebook. This is an older version. There's a much newer one now, but there's just this really cool, can you see this all okay? We couldn't quite get it online. So the one here shows that a neighborhood mapped sort of the skills and the talents of each of the neighbors, right? And then they mapped who had what in common and who could meet whose needs, right? Who could the carpenter connect with? Who could the musician connect with, to start to see? So look how this is a little bit more mycorrhizal looking right over here, with a little bit more communication happening, a little bit more functionality, reciprocity happening. So we can't do that if we don't know who our neighbors are at all.
And so, you know, we've been thinking about these parallels, like, so what is a mycorrhizal fungi in a human community? And it's really just the networks of exchange, right? So you can have 500 people in an apartment building and they can be completely separate from each other and have no relationships and be like a monoculture, even though they're all so close to each other. Or they can all start talking in the hallways and sharing eggs and sharing sugar and doing childcare. And you know, yes, right now everything is on hold, but that is the formation of the mycorrhizal networks and these pollinator networks. And that's why we brought in the aerial and the subterranean to our talk about plants, right? Because these are the elements that are forming these relationships. And so who are you? Are you a bee? Are you a fungus? Are you a nitrogen fixer? What do you want to be? And,
what do you need? Like, what can I provide that will bring you in and help you keep coming over? Like for your neighbor, it could be good cookies, or their special, oh, my neighbor has the best tea. I don't know where she get it, but it's so good. I'm going to go over and get some more, right? So
or you're playing the best music.
Or you're playing the best music. Like I have a neighbor that plays really loud music, but wow, I love it. It's really good. I'm like, yes, go. I love band practice, right? So it's really, and I yeah, not only because it's good, but I know them and they're good people. Like we don't hang out, but get to know them, and that crying baby or that barking dog could kind of go down a little bit because there's the human connection right there. So I also just wanted to share this one last image to talk about our last point. Is one thing that we really need to do is change our aesthetic, and to really understand that for some people, this type of a garden might not look so tidy, but there's order to it. Right, so this is a thriving plant guild, right? You have your main little tree here. This was which kind of tree?
That's a peach tree.
That's the peach tree. Yeah, we had a cherry one. And these are its little companions, or not companions, these are its little guild members who are multifunctional and helping that little tree to thrive.
That's right. But yeah, as Anne was just saying, we have to change our aesthetic so that we're not expecting everything to stay in its own little box and be so tidy, that things in nature grow into each other. And that's part of the sharing and part of the multifunctionality, is that there's a mixing that happens. And so opening up our idea of what's beautiful, and you know, many of us are already there and many of us are still working on it. Like, oh, let us embrace this slightly wild look where everything is welcome. And when we can manage it, we can get rid of some of those noxious weeds, or have less of them, and have less, you know, of the stinging insects and more of the beneficial, you know, however we want to encourage the community to go, but to really just embrace and love that kind of messiness of
orderly,
together.
Orderly, but messy, right? And just on that thing, because you talked about the bees again. So the native bees also don't sting usually unless you pinch them. So they're another really cool. Just a little. I gotta throw them out for the native bee.
She's so in love with them.
So we want to end and make time for questions. We hope we saw there's some stuff in the chat going on. We wanted to just maybe end on this Bill Mollison quote. Should we end on that or no? No, we don't need to.
About the tidiness.
About tidiness.
Sure.
Or maybe just he just says we should not confuse order with tidiness. Tidiness separates species and creates work. Okay, so think about us as humans being separateness and this idea of tidy, you know, right? Whereas order integrates, reducing work and discouraging insect attack, right? So order integrates. European gardens, often extraordinarily tidy, result in functional disorder and low yield. Creativity is seldom tidy. I'll say it again, creativity is seldom tidy. Perhaps we could say that tidiness is something that happens when compulsive activity replaces thoughtful creativity.
Doesn't that make you want to go out and be a little less tidy?
Well, with neighborhoods too, just like, you know, keeping to yourself, you know, order invites, it integrates. So how can we do that more in our communities, even on the family sense? So this is our goal right here.
Yes.
So we'll stop the share.
I lost the chat box. Where did we go?
The chat box is right here.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. That was just, I got emotional a few times just even seeing the monocrops and thinking of people just doing it all on their own and how that doesn't serve. And so just great suggestions. I'm looking forward to putting out the resources for the like getting to know your neighbors. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable too. So it's like we all have to kind of get out of our comfort zone. This is the time our world needs it.
Yeah, and we're having to find ways to connect with each other from a distance with our masks on without being able to do the kind of sharing and being together that we evolved with. And amazing creative solutions are happening. You know, the like front porch dinners and the music and the sharing and the checking in on people from a distance. Like, it's all still happening.
Yeah, how we get creative. Well, so before we get to the Q&A, I'm just going to ask everybody to fill out the survey. And that helps me. I read all of them and it helps me to select future topics. And so please fill that out. And then upcoming events. This month we have a fruit tree care, winter fruit tree care coming up next week. And then a volunteer roundtable, which we're going to be talking about our various programs and, you know, reaching out to our volunteers and people that have expressed interest to see how we can get creative with supporting each other and this organization to really take it to that next level, because it's all going into the neighborhood concept, the placemaking concept. We had Mark Lakeman come like it, but what does that look like? How do we all support? Like, we need everybody on board to help us to figure out. It can't just be us doing it. Like, how do we pull people in? So we're having that next week, our volunteer roundtable. And then we're having a great speaker on evolving through crisis. I found a wonderful speaker on this topic, and it was really around the fires, and now it's always like we're in some kind of crisis, so how do we keep going? But anyway, so if there's anybody that has questions, throw them into the chat so we can take this valuable time with Lydia and Anne and answer them. I think Allison mentioned there was some from Facebook too, so I'm waiting to see if she has any.
Okay, great.
But while we're waiting, I have to show you, as you guys were talking, I'm like, oh, I forgot. I sprouted lupin. And they sprouted, I didn't mean to sprout them. I meant to just get them wet and cold, because apparently that's what you're supposed to do. And I'm like, oh, my nitrogen fixer. And I'm like, oh no, these need to get in the ground. So hopefully.
It was today, Nicole. And
I'm going to, right after this.
Not to break off the new roots and the new shoots, they'll be just fine.
Yeah, that's it. I was like, oh no. So in the chat, let's see, we have something. Oh, no questions from Facebook yet.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can
also just show y'all, if you're into it, you want to geek out with us. So for Christmas, I got some bobs, Blue Orchard Bees. So you actually order Blue Orchard Bees from, what's it called? One Green World, and we'll provide that link in the resources. And the reason that we like the bobs is because they're the most effective fruit tree pollinator, and they mostly go only about 100 yards or 300 feet away from any place. So 100 yards, they kind of stay in, up to 300, but that's really rare. And
they're uniquely here. I'm just going to show you.
You can't really
Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it. I can see them.
These are their little pupae, and they're sort of popular right now because they're one of the few native bees that can actually kind of be propagated and sold, because you can, take these little pupae and mail them to people.
So we're sharing this in our neighborhood. So Lydia and I live about 4 blocks away, and our mutual friend lives like just half a block away. So we're gonna have our little neighborhood bob family happening, right? So, and again, they're gonna stay close. I have a cherry, and I have a cherry and a plum and a pomegranate and an apple, multiple fruit trees, and they're going to help me keep them really well pollinated. So we'll see how that turns out, and we're super excited to.
Yeah, and there's nothing like having them right now. We have them, and we're gonna, and because they're actually native to a little bit further north, they recommend you keep them in the fridge if you're this far south, and they need 4 days at a certain temperature before they emerge from the pupae. And there's nothing like this just doing it ourselves, right? You can read and read and read and read, but now we got a box of bobs. So that's pretty cool.
We got a bob of bobs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's no question.
We did have something from Facebook, but is there any service where I can have someone come out and see my garden area, give advice, and help me? I have a 1/4 acre and 15 fruit trees. And so, yeah, I did ask like where they're located. This is from Facebook, because, depending on where they're located, obviously, if they're in Santa Cruz, You guys might
Right.
be.
Yeah, we travel the Bay Area.
Okay, okay. So
Pollinators.
Like pollinators, yeah.
you guys are pollinators. Excellent. I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So I look forward to getting all those resources, and we'll send people, send that out probably next week.
Okay, good.
For next week, and on our adventure and blue orchard bees. So you can just order them, and then I'm assuming there's all kinds of, like, they talk about what you do with them. Do you just throw them outside, or like where do you put them? So
There's a very thorough information packet because they nest in tubes of a certain diameter. So when these adults emerge, the first thing they'll go do is find pollen and then start laying eggs. And they lay their egg on a little ball of pollen so that the larvae eats that when they emerge. And they, you know, they pack little tubes full of a little series of egg and pollen, build a wall, egg and pollen, build a wall, egg and pollen. And then, you know, so you need to know what size those are and where you want to put them so you attract the bee to the right location and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're fun. That was fun. That was my first time I ever received bees.
Bees for Christmas, for birthday, bee birthday. Yeah.
Yeah.
it's wonderful. It's a good present, and it benefits everybody. All the other
So
critters.
thanks everyone for coming. It was really fun to see you all this fine Saturday morning. And we hope that you will take some of these questions, like particularly about how you play your role in your community. And if you find that the things you know how to do are pretty limited, or you know, only in kind of one sphere of life, then maybe you want to focus on how you can make yourself a more multifunctional element for your system that you're in.
Right. And also we like to ask, so in our, you know, we like to ask people to think about, like, what kind of, you know, guild plant would you be? Right? Are you taking what's there and transforming it so that it's readily available? Are you protecting? Are you keeping resources low, like a mulch plant? Are you keeping the moisture in? Are you sort of sustaining some ground, some really grounding place for your community? Are you a dynamic accumulator, right? Are you bringing in things from further away to bring them closer to be able to also have available and ready in that soil? Are you a repellent and a defender of your space, you know, in a kind way, and just by being there, right? Are you bringing in, and are you repelling, right? So, you know, like parenting, I find as a mom, sometimes that's like I'm bringing things in and I'm keeping things out, right? So a lot of times we have different roles. So think about your own roles, and the practice of creating the guild can be a really personal one, right? So as you're doing that, as that unfolds for you, really think about, you know, what am I most attracted to? What are, like, a lot of people, they bring in all nitrogen fixers. They just love them. They think they're the best. And so they have to kind of, or some people just want bulbs, right? So just sort of looking and paying attention to those things as you're doing it. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Oh, there's one question came in. Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
Have chickens, do I need to be concerned about them reducing pollinator and beneficial insect populations with chickens? Do I need to be concerned about having the chickens reduce?
Only if you totally have way too many chickens for your system.
Yeah, if you have too many chickens, yeah, it's all about balance, but it should not.
Yeah, when loose in the garden, I got so it was like, I guess.
Well, I like one trick. I mean, not so much for pollinators, but for slugs and stuff. The idea, like, have them be fed, and then right around evening before it gets dark, let them go out and eat the insects you don't want, because they come out around then. And then it gets dark and they go back inside. So you've fed them, so they're not going to go tear apart your garden, right? But they're like, ooh, tasty little bundles of protein. I think I'll eat those, right? Yeah.
They're just another player. They're another element in the garden. So they're doing things for you, and they're connecting things in their own way. And it's just balancing them so that they're not, because, you know, you've seen the situation with too many chickens. They've scratched everything up. It's bare. There's poop and feathers everywhere. It's not super nice, right? But 3 chickens in a polyculture garden is astonishing. They create just enough disturbance to keep you out there tidying.
Even 5 or 6 depending on, I had
Depending on your
7 for a
garden.
while,
Yeah.
depending on your garden, right? So it really just depends on how big your space is, but it shouldn't be unless you got something crazy going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll help you reduce your need for tidiness.
I love that idea of letting them come out because I have chickens and letting them kind of explore the garden right before dusk.
Yeah.
Sometimes I try to keep them out because
Because you know, if you let them out in the morning, you can't get them back in. And
no, they'll wreak havoc too. They'll dig up everything I just plant. Like it just it's great suggestions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Go out and have a fabulous Saturday, everybody.
We will.
thank you.
Thank you.